Good evening. I'm Ryan Doyle, sitting in for Michael Corrin. For years now, there have been debates in this country over how far we go as a nation to accommodate religion and cultures, and how high we set our level of expectation when it comes to assimilating. That debate has found itself fully reignited in, of all places, a Toronto swimming pool. A few weeks ago, conversation erupted over newly designed and taxpayer-funded aquatic centres. The $15 million project was a work of art in Toronto's Regent Park community, and it had all the bells and whistles you can imagine. It also had a schedule that included separate swim times for women and men. The reason for these gender-specific pool hours wasn't based in a demand for privacy from women who simply wanted to have a dip on their own. The decision was made after heavy consultation between the city and local Muslim women that cited religious and cultural reasons for wanting the separate swim times. The city's accommodating didn't stop there. In addition to the segregated hours, a curtain was built to put around this beautiful pool that the women wouldn't have to feel the gaze of leering men from the pool's viewing area, which led me to wonder just how long it would take before cultures began to butt heads poolside. Enter a single dad named Chris, who asked that we didn't publish his last name. Chris recently signed his 9-year-old daughter up for female-only swim lessons and unknowingly entered himself into a culture clash. Chris was told by a separate city facility from the one I mentioned above that as a man, he was going to have to be banned from watching his little girl practice, and that if he wanted to watch his young daughter swim, it would be best to put her in a mixed-gender swim class. The reason staff gave him should really offend us all. Female-only swims are created on the basis of accommodating cultural and religious practices and requirements. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not against allowing people to openly practice their faith. In fact, I'm all for it. However, there has to be a line drawn when cultures and faith have an expectation of accommodation for beliefs that smack firmly against Canadian values. We should not tolerate ideas and customs that suggest that women are inferior to men, even if the activity is something as mundane as doing the backstroke. The reason for the tolerance we see is simple. Weak-kneed politicians are paralyzed with fear of offending, which means our society simply condones what we should strongly oppose. As a Canadian culture, there should never be a fear of standing proudly to say that we believe in integration over segregation. And we should help new cultures understand that women have a place right beside men, whether it be in the boardroom or the swimming pool. We should demand that government officials on all levels meet these issues head-on, instead of getting wrapped up in the banner of political correctness. Because if we don't stand for something, we are likely to fall for anything. You know, I hate to say I told you so, but it would seem that that is, in fact, the case when we talk about this swimming pool where dad now can't take his daughter and actually watch her swim, which any father really should have the right to do in this country. It is just another level of accommodation gone way too far, if you ask me. Sun Media National Affairs columnist Anthony Furey joins me to discuss this a little further. Anthony, I think sometimes we bend a little too far to the point we break and we lose an identity and perhaps a little bit of Canadian culture with it.
Ryan, we absolutely do. I grew up in this actual neighborhood, Thorncliffe Park, Flemington Park area, and I've seen it do a precipitous decline over the years in these very issues of accommodation. We have this story with the public pools, which I think is just horrendous, but we also had a story the other year. It's the same neighborhood where the Valley Park Middle School, which, as you'll remember, has the cafeteria converted into a mosque on Fridays where the girls sit at the back and the menstruating girls sit at the very, very far back. Premier Kathleen Wynne, she was education minister at the time, she thought it was fine. It was hunky-dory. Because, of course, these people vote en masse for her and contribute to her campaign. So I think we really need to ask more of our politicians, Ryan, to just not put up with this silliness. And let's get some real equality, not inequality, which is what this is.
Yeah, I described it in the monologue sort of as a weak-kneed, knee-jerk response to things where they wrap themselves in the political correct banner as opposed to really questioning. You know, it's almost like they're afraid to question, in a sense, what's going on here, and they just don't want to offend anybody, step on any toes, so they just give in.
Well, I also think what politicians, when they do ethnic and religious pandering, are doing, they think, no, it's okay. We're using them. You get that from, maybe that's why Kathleen Wynne would say she's cozying up to people in the Don Valley West neighborhood. You might hear that from the federal government in the way that they've done their, done what I'd call their ethnic pandering in the Greater Toronto Area ridings. We're using them. No, you not. When it comes to radical religions, they are always using you, and the results are never good. And that's why we've always got to look out for this stuff.
Yeah, and when we talk about the case of the swimming pool, I think there's been a bit of a snow job when it comes to it, whether it's Regent Park in Toronto or whether it's this pool where the dad can't see his daughter swim. I think the public has basically fallen for the line of, well, women want to have a private class, or, somehow it's like a private gym for women where they just want to be sheltered away from men. This is a different story here. There's a different fabric to it because it's based in a religious concern.
Yeah, this has actually been going on in that area in Flemington Park for many years. We learned from the story, and one of the employees at the center did acknowledge that, well, this has been in place for many years, that this policy, maybe it's only been flexibly enforced here and there, and it showed that religious accommodation went far back. But even the basic idea of gender, dividing amongst gender lines, I mean, at one point we called it segregation. It used to drive me crazy when I'd go to the gyms at U of T and they had women's only hour. It was the most ridiculous thing in the world. My girlfriend would just go, haha, I get to work out 15 minutes before you, and I'd have to stand and wait for the clock to change, and most people acknowledged it was silly. I mean, personally, if you feel uncomfortable in a certain environment, if your religion suggests that you can't swim with other people, you can't work out with other people, well, if you want to believe that there's a God who has those edicts for you, you're completely free in Canada to believe it. But you have to make the accommodations within your lifestyle. You have to go and look in the gym or the pool and go, oh, are there any guys around? Okay, now I can go in and swim. And if a dude comes by, you go, oh, geez, I better put on the shawl or whatever and head on back to the change room. It is not up to the system or the other individuals to feel like they are the ones doing wrong. The idea that a father is somehow insulting people's modesty by just wanting to be there for his daughter, kind of make sure she doesn't drown or something, is ridiculous.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail right on the head. I'm all for religious freedom. I believe you should have the right to practice your religion. But when you start to impose your views on the rest of society and expect everybody else to change, I think that's where you cross the line with everyone.
And this is where I get a little worried about certain people's interpretations of Islam. Because remember, the Muhammad cartoons issue drove me crazy more than any other religious excess, Ryan, because we cannot draw Muhammad cartoons. Not just, if you decide I cannot draw cartoons, because I don't want to, because the law tells me I can't, fine. And if you decide that Ryan and Anthony are going to go to hell for drawing Muhammad cartoons, well, fine, you can believe that. Well, hold on a second, though. Anthony and Ryan legally shouldn't be able to draw the cartoons even though they don't believe in Allah. I mean, that is just madness. And that's a similar thing we're getting up to with the pool segregation and with the Valley Park cafeteria stuff. Fine, you want to go to mosque on late Friday afternoon. I don't want to. You have the right to. But we can't just change the system so that everybody has to enforce your laws.
Yeah, I want to switch gears just very quickly. And I mean, it's not out of a different vein, let's say. Your column that you wrote a couple of days ago talking a little bit about the terrorism suspects in London, the fact that the media basically, even for asking questions, is getting labeled as Islamophobes.
Right. The whole concern is that we are supposed to apologize for this, rationalize for these things, and look the other way. And where we can draw the strands between these two conversations, just because you don't want men to be in a swimming pool when women are there, that just means you're very Sharia compliant. It's not even exceptionally radical Islam. It's sort of, I'd call it middle ground. You're just not a reform Muslim. I don't think that makes you someone who's necessarily sympathetic to terrorist leanings like the fellows in London. But at the same time, if we get this climate of fear around just asking probing questions, and not treating these people with kid gloves, that whole thing permeates to the point where, okay, we're not criticizing the swimming pool stuff, but we're not even asking challenging questions about what mosque did these kids go to in London. Now, the mosque in London say they had nothing to do with these kids, but there are other people who have said otherwise, and their classmates have said that some of these kids tried to take them to mosque. Well, which mosque? And please do not call me a racist or an Islamophobe like Haroon Siddiqui suggested we are in the Toronto Star for just asking these questions, because in the end, it's also Muslim families who are being torn apart by these acts. So, they have a right to justice too.
Yeah, and I think as you point out in the article, we have to get to the root of this. How is the recruitment done? How are these people being brought from, let's say, standard westernized lives into the realm of Al-Qaeda and other splinter groups? I think that question needs to be asked, and you have to do the digging to answer that question effectively.
Absolutely, but we're still in this climate right now where asking the question is seen as Islamophobic. I've never particularly understood what that term means, or racist, even though this isn't a race, this is an ideology. And sure, I get it. Of the more than 1 billion Muslims out there in the world, most of them aren't out there doing this stuff. And in Mali right now, Muslims are taking up arms against radical Muslims to stop them from imposing Sharia law across the land. I get this. Nobody out there is trying to cast aspersions on everybody in London, Ontario, on every member of the faith faithful in London, but you've still got to do the probing questions. When there is an attack on a certain community, people end up looking within that community or the community that perpetrated it to try and learn more. It's just about learning more, and it's for the benefit of everybody.
So where does it come from? Where does this automatic, taking the brush and saying you're an Islamophobe come from? Why do people not want to get the truth out?
Well, I think there's a lot of binary thinking going on there. Okay, I'm a left-wing guy. I don't like that George Bush guy because he's got a Texas accent and he's Republican or whatever. And that George Bush guy, he doesn't like the Middle East guys, so he did some war with those guys. The Middle East guys don't like the George Bush guy, therefore I like the Middle East guys. Life is not that simple. You can't do binary thinking. It drives me crazy that a lot of feminists, for instance, don't acknowledge that right now the biggest threat to women's equality throughout the world is Sharia law that's being enforced in our country, for sure, but also very virulently in other countries. It's really upsetting that people can't cross these lines, and I think we have to get rid of this cheap left-wing, right-wing dichotomy here when we're looking at this, and really realize that really in Canada or in the West, the left and the right, we're all pretty similar in views and our ideas of liberties when it comes to looking at these people who have these very, very radical views that are definitely misogynistic.
Anthony, thanks so much.
My pleasure.